I hereby call our first Healthy Buildings Accountability Board meeting to order with a quorum of 8 out of 9 members. We're missing just Kristen White, so if she joins us, then we'll add her to our list of folks that's joining us. First, thank you all so much for volunteering to be a part of this process. We're in for a long several months and years, as this is a permanent public body of the city of Evanston. So thank you again for volunteering to serve, and let's get right into it. First, do we have any public comment? Great. So then we'll move to introductions. If you could share your name, experience relevant to the work of the committee, and why you applied to join the committee, and just a brief explainer on how these mics work. You just have to hit the push button. If the green light is on, then your mic is on. So I'm going to go ahead and turn mine off, and we can start all the way to my left.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Noonan. I'm currently Director of Business Development for ABM, but what I've engaged in this group through BOMA Suburban Chicago, representing Building Owners and Management Association throughout the Chicagoland. I was a former operator of commercial buildings itself. I've always put people first when I was running properties as well. I teach sustainability at Triton College as well. I'm looking to grow with this community and figure out how I can kind of better suit you on an operational standpoint of healthy buildings and the way we look at it and to be sustainable. And so I'm looking to kind of just meet and introduce everyone and grow from there.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Dean. I am an Evanston resident and work for Elevate, a nonprofit that does energy efficiency and clean energy work primarily. Before that, I was with Center for Neighborhood Technology and first began engaging with the city on green buildings issues in that role. And why I'm here, I think, is because I'm very interested in how to achieve the twin goals of sustainability and affordability, and so interested in how we can implement an ordinance which is good for reducing emissions but does not harm affordability.
Hello, I'm Baxter Swilley. I work with Evanston Cradle to Career, which is a collective impact agency that focuses on systemic equity. Prior to then, I worked with the Oak Park Regional Housing Center, where we dispensed HUD housing programs. I've done a lot of work in community and economic development throughout the city of Chicago. I'm a resident here in Evanston. I'm here because I certainly want to see this ordinance succeed, and I want to make sure that it does what it was intended to do. I hope that this board can explore all of the potential unintended consequences. I'm interested in housing affordability, equity in housing, but I'm also interested in the economic and commercial growth of the city of Evanston. I hope that we can balance those interests.
Hi, I'm Swasti Shah. I'm also an Evanston resident and an urban planner by training. I've been working for the Urban Land Institute of Chicago for over nearly 12 years now, and a big part of the work that I've been doing centers around making our communities, more vibrant, more affordable, more sustainable. So all of this is of great interest to me, and specifically just as an Evanston resident too, I think this is a great opportunity for us to do something which is very forward-thinking, which is needed, but at the same time do it with an eye on how we can do it in an equitable fashion, that it's not a burden on our residents or building owners. So I'm excited to be a part of that conversation.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Victor. I am representing the Neighborhood Building Owners Alliance, which is a group of apartment building owners in the Chicagoland area. I am a mechanical engineer by degree, and currently I own a portfolio of apartment buildings that serve limited income tenants. My experience and excitement about being on this committee is that there's a lot of technologies out there to achieve sustainability goals and zero emissions. And as an engineer and building owner, I'd like to marry that as a win-win for tenants and a win for building owners on expense and operations. So great to be here. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Paula Scholl, retired mechanical engineer. I spent 37 years at Sargent & Lundy working in power generation and energy. I'm also co-chair of the Environment Board and was chair of the Building Electrification Working Group, which was the precursor to this body, as well as the Healthy Buildings Technical Committee. Jessica Miller, who you'll meet in a minute, was also a very active member of the Building Electrification Working Group, and we worked closely with Ben, who you'll meet in a minute, and with Kara as well. So my concern is very similar to the rest of you, is marrying the technical with the equity focus of this group.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben, or Benjamin Martin. I'm a former City of Evanston staff. I used to help run the benchmarking ordinance and help develop the ordinance that we're all here today for. Currently, I work for Healthcare Service Corporation as a sustainability analyst. So I work in corporate real estate, doing a lot of the same work that this ordinance is seeking to accomplish, but now from the private side. So I'm here because I'm extremely passionate about this work. I love Evanston and a bit of a policy wonk. So really excited to try and figure out how we can be the best advisors on a really complicated topic. So thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Miller. I'm an Evanston resident. I'm also, I work for an organization called IMT, which stands for the Institute for Market Transformation. And we really focus on working with cities and states across the country on building performance policy. So I have a lot of expertise in the type of policy that we're talking about. Our organization's done a lot of thinking on community accountability boards as well. So I'm just thrilled to, get some real life experience. These are very new ideas and new types of things. And, we have an opportunity to, be a model really for the rest of the country because people are watching, and which is exciting. I have a background in affordable housing as well, so I've done a lot of thinking about sort of the intersection of building performance policy and how it impacts affordable housing, so really care about that. But nice to meet everybody.
Great. Thank you all. And just in time, I see Kristen White has joined us online. Kristen, we're just doing introductions. If you could tell us name, your experience relevant to the committee, and why you applied to join the committee.
Sure. I apologize. I'm trying to be there in person. A meeting ran late. So I am on my way. Does it make sense to just stay on camera? Or if I can get there in like 15 minutes, does that make sense?
If you could come in person, I think that'd be great.
Okay, good. So I'm Kristen White. I'm the Senior Policy and Advocacy Director at Connections for the Homeless. And we were invited to recommend someone on staff to represent kind of the perspective that Connections brings to this work. Absolutely in support of healthy buildings and the implications that has for our community, and also wanting to ensure that we bring kind of the perspective of affordability and how these decisions can support affordability for Evanston residents. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot and where I'm able to contribute to do that.
Great. Thank you, Kristen, and see you soon. Now we'll move into staff introductions. I'll pass it over to Kirsten first.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kirsten Drehobel-Vega. I think I know most everyone. Swasti, Kristen, very nice to meet you both. I have been with the City of Evanston for 2.5 years now. I'm a sustainability and resilience coordinator. Basically, anytime you see a nameless email or something like a calendar invite, listserv, something posted on the website, it's coming from me. So if there's ever any questions, please feel free to send them my way. It's very nice to be here, and I am excited to see what the board does. Kara, back to you.
Thanks, Kirsten. My name is Kara Pratt. I'm the Chief Sustainability and Resilience Officer for the city. I'm serving as your interim chair for this meeting until we have elections to vote on a chair, so I usually won't be talking this much, but love my 15 minutes of fame up here. I've been with the city for 4 years. Right now it's just Kirsten and I in the Sustainability and Resilience Division, but we will be filling our third vacancy, and so we hope to have someone on board the first week of December. And they will then be the main point of contact for both this board and the technical committee moving forward. So just a brief history, we've had a benchmarking ordinance in Evanston that focuses on energy and water data disclosure since 2016. And as you all know, we passed the Healthy Buildings Ordinance, which creates building performance standards in Evanston back in March. So we're here to create the rules and to go through just the process of how that ordinance will be implemented over the next several years. One brief update on the Department of Energy grant. As many of you also know, we were a recipient of an Inflation Reduction Act Department of Energy grant for $10.4 million earlier this year, or maybe late last year. Time flies. And due to the state of the federal government, we're still unsure about receipt of that grant, so we don't have any news on that front. We've not been able to have any substantive conversations with our staff points of contact at the Department of Energy on that grant. And then, as I mentioned, next meeting we'll be holding chair and vice chair elections. So if you think that this role of leading the meeting and building the agenda with staff, keeping people on time, things like that is interesting to you, then please think about those roles, and we'll have nominations and elections at the next meeting. Any questions on any of these topics so far? Great.
So you'll chair the next meeting as well?
I'll chair the very first couple minutes of the next meeting. All right, any other questions? Great, let's get right into it. So we started the Healthy Buildings Technical Committee meeting on when was that, the 29th, the 30th? The 29th. So we've had one of those meetings so far. That subcommittee, which some of you are on, sort of feeds into this board. And we started that meeting in the same way, going through the responsibilities in the ordinance of both the board and the committee. So I know this is hard to see, but I'm just going to do a rapid fire reminder of what this board is responsible for in our code. First, to provide quarterly updates on the rulemaking process to City Council. Next, to provide an annual report to City Council. So 4 quarterly updates, or 3 quarterly updates, and then the annual report. To approve the methods for prioritizing equitable building decarbonization, and also to establish that list of equity prioritized buildings. To develop a plan for allocating funds from any fines collected associated with this ordinance. To advise on the development of rules for implementing the ordinance. To review and issue recommendations on alternative compliance pathway plans related to the ordinance. To recommend metrics and data to track the ordinance's impact, especially on disinvested communities and equity prioritized buildings. To report to the City Council on matters concerning the Healthy Buildings Ordinance or other similar policies. To advise on community priorities that could be advanced through additional requirements. To provide guidance on community outreach and engagement, and to advocate for synergistic policies and programs related to this ordinance. So generally, those are the responsibilities of the Accountability Board. Any questions on that? Great. And so then I also, just for comparison, wanted to go through some of the responsibilities of the Technical Committee. As the name suggests, it's a little bit more of a technical group in terms of data and metrics for rulemaking. So they're coming up with the final and interim performance standards, methodology for reviewing alternative compliance plans, some paperwork associated with the alternative compliance plan process, evaluating the equity prioritized buildings and any sort of interventions that would take place there to see their impact, also aiding in community outreach and engagement, also advocating for synergistic policies and programs. They can recommend, if necessary, engagement of an outside expert consultant to help with some of the data analysis that goes into this work. And they're also defining net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So any questions about some of those distinctions? Yes.
So are is the board and the committee like equivalent to each other, each giving recommendations, or does one recommend action to each other?
The technical committee will be recommending through this board
Okay.
and then to city council.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, let's get right into it. So now I'm going to ask you all to participate in an exercise to come up with all of the tasks that you might imagine this board will be responsible for. And we're doing this so that we can eventually get and work towards a timeline, work towards some prioritization. And so I filled in 2 so far that came up during the technical committee meeting when they asked that this group, the accountability board, focus on these things. So we've got identify those entities that have not reported benchmarking data and provide guidance on fines, and determine outreach and engagement. And then I'm just going to hear from you all the other tasks that you think we might be responsible for, and I'm going to fill in this slide.
I noticed the list of identifying equitable properties.
Yes.
Do we have a definition of that, and has a list been started?
So that is on our agenda a little bit later on to talk about. But if people want to jump there, we can also do that.
Talk about a definition of terms.
So there's a definition in the ordinance of equity prioritized buildings.
All of the terms.
So they're defined as including but not limited to public institutions, religious institutions, nonprofit organizations, and affordable housing. But we can do this exercise too. It was going to be very similar, talking through either the metrics, specific buildings that people want to prioritize, up to you all how you want to approach that.
Well, could I suggest another task? This isn't directly with the equity one, but just to put on the
Yes.
list. One thing that I'd like to do pretty early, I think, is just understand the experience that other places in the country that have adopted these kind of building performance standards have had, particularly with the interactions with affordable housing. So like we are pretty early in this, but there's others. New York, Boston, Maryland, I think a number of other states, counties, cities have done this. So I think some level of like just learning by this board of what's been the experience in other places would be really nice to start with.
Also, can I just jump in? So just also understanding what is the scope that we are looking at, how many properties, where they are, like is there some inventory like that exists, or is it mapped? Because that would be a really good starting point to just start thinking about what this means for the city.
Well, that already exists and it is mapped. So I'm not sure that's a task for this group because there's already a list online. If you Google Healthy Buildings Ordinance, and it shows on the map as well.
It shows all the
locations.
buildings?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's something that we can send to you all. We can post it as a document on the website for reference, and then we can send a list to you all after this meeting.
I was going to add too, my organization did a little bit of preliminary, like looking at which which buildings might qualify as affordable housing and how that like overlaid with the covered buildings, so we could sort of talk through what we did and what we might have been missing, like what else we want to do to sort of dig into the covered buildings list. I think the other thing is getting an understanding of what resources are available without the DOE grant, incentives for the building owners, but maybe also for this work in terms of analysis. Like, do we have any availability to go outside this group, or is it sort of on us to do all the analysis?
I don't recall which committee, the technical committee or the board, or this board is responsible for establishing the property types, but it appears to me that the 605 Davis building will be an outlier, a significantly set apart, large building. And I hope that we can create a criteria or some sort of a rubric to account for buildings of that size. I know that we have, I mean, it's unique in its size and its ownership as a private organization. I think there are other buildings on Northwestern campus that are that size, but I hope that we can think critically about some of the outlier types of buildings.
I'd like to add just sort of like, again, on this list of building understanding, making sure that everyone on this board understands the performance metrics. Similarly, how can we best interact with the technical committee so that we're kind of efficient in, two different groups with overlapping goals, and maybe not having to like wait until we hear back from their meeting notes, or just how to make the two groups work together nicely. And I also should have mentioned in my intro, I would say I'm an expert on how we collect this building data that we'll be measuring. So if you do have questions about that, happy to try and help bring anyone up to speed on what that looks like. So, yeah.
As you mentioned, like understanding what we mean by all the building performance standards. And, as I was reading through this, I did have like a few clarification questions. So I wonder what's the mechanism to address those? Do you want to do that in a meeting, or if we have like questions, we just sort of consolidate that, discuss that, send to staff? Like, how do you envision that?
I think we could hold dedicated space for that at our next meeting. So maybe that can be an agenda topic for clarifying the ordinance language.
Yeah, thank you.
As far as tasks, well, Baxter, you brought up, who's developing the property types. I believe the technical committee had established that as a task for the technical committee at their last meeting. But I believe one of the tasks of this group is to approve methods for prioritizing equitable buildings, equity prioritized buildings. So the technical committee, as I see it, is establishing the property types from the, 80 or so property types in the literature. But then the methodology for prioritization is one of the tasks, I believe, of this group. Another area where there's some technical committee responsibilities and then responsibilities of this group. The technical committee, I believe, is establishing a methodology for alternative compliance plans, but this group will be reviewing that and then reviewing specific plans as buildings submit their building-specific plans as it goes along. So kind of take that methodology, review and comment, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, and then as buildings start to submit individual plans, especially with requests for alternative compliance, this group would evaluate those on a case-by-case basis.
I was going to quickly interject that, and I don't know if I know I didn't introduce myself as this, but Tom, myself, and Paula are on the technical review committee as well.
Actually, I'm not on the technical committee. I'm just going to be attending most of the meetings as a liaison to the Environment Board.
She fooled me.
At the last. That's why I sat behind you guys.
Oh, I thought you were, then I'm, okay.
So who's the third member recommended by the building owners?
Pardon?
Who's the third member on this panel recommended by the building owners? There should be 3, right?
There's 3 on the technical committee, and it's Madeline Robertson.
Oh, who's on the,
No. That's on technical, but he means on this,
On
on the
this?
accountability.
There don't need, that it's not a requirement that all 3 of them serve on both, just that they serve on the technical committee.
It was a right of first refusal,
Yeah.
I see.
and that one just didn't.
Any other tasks we want to especially highlight now? This will be sort of a living process for us.
Well, going down into the future, we will be establishing metrics for evaluating the impact on affordability. That won't happen for a while, but that's going to be a definite indicator that's in the purview of this group, because by the time we evaluate those metrics, the technical committee may have completed their work.
I was just gonna, I know outreach and engagement is up there, but I think that's a really important piece for the group. So just wanted to sort of lift it up. I think like the idea here is that we're, doing things in a way that protects underserved communities from negative impacts on this ordinance, and how do we sort of identify gaps in what this group knows and make sure that we're kind of representing all of those community priorities, because we may not have knowledge of that just within this group. So kind of mapping out maybe what we know and what we don't know once we have a better understanding of the buildings.
Anything else on this task, or should we move on to our equity prioritized buildings exercise? All right, let's do it. I will read through these briefly, just for the record. We've got understand performance metrics, stakeholder mapping, determine outreach and engagement, approve methods for prioritizing equitably, understand the covered properties list, establish metrics for evaluating impact, learn from other communities, especially regarding affordable housing, review alternative compliance pathway plans process and individual plans, understand what resources are available without the DOE grant, strategize committee and board working together, identify those who have not reported benchmarking data, and provide guidance on fines, and then the criteria and rubric for different property types, especially the outlier properties. All right, moving on to equity prioritized buildings. So as you all mentioned and heard in the ordinance, that's a major component of the responsibilities of the board, is determining both the metrics for defining equity prioritized buildings, and then also eventually coming up with a list of equity prioritized buildings. So I put onto the slide just that codified definition in the ordinance, which is including but not limited to public institutions, religious institutions, nonprofit organizations, and affordable housing. And so from here, we can either talk about specific property types, we can talk about the metrics we want to use to create this list, we can talk about specific properties. The world is our oyster. So I'll let you all determine how we want to talk about this.
So for the definition of affordable housing, are we going to, this is a question for everyone, define that as a property that receives low-income housing tax credits and, multiple layers of financing, or what is that definition really? And if it's been defined already, let me know.
I would say that it should go beyond that. We should also be looking at, that is not maybe restricted, but is market rate, but is still affordable. And I think there is a lot of that type of housing in Evanston, which is just naturally affordable and owned by or run by kind of mom and pop type property owners. So I would think that that's something we should take a closer look at.
And we're talking about buildings that are 20,000 square feet or more, correct? Okay, so when we talk about, as a building owner of product that you're discussing, that at that point, to me, is you might be a single owner, mom and pop, an LLC with a sole individual as a sole manager of that LLC, but 20,000 square feet or more, are your rents market rate yet affordable is kind of an oxymoron to me. So we need to define that a little better as we go along.
There is such a thing as naturally occurring affordable housing, so they are not necessarily contradictory.
I know, but, is it a rental rate? Is it a percentage? I know, because I own that, naturally, Courtney. But my rents are at market, but, I'm just trying to talk out loud and define that term more. So I think what might help is, once again, talking out loud, is if we identify, let's say, 20 buildings that we would be seen as affordable because they're not, the gym member, dance nights, yogurt bar kind of thing. If we define those buildings and say that is a building that a person making so much can afford that building. Maybe we do it by something like that, as a building that's affordable, with define the building type and what it serves and what that rent is. And that building is affordable to people that are making a certain amount of income. It's like 30% of their income kind of thing.
Yeah. So here's a place where I'd really want to see what other cities have done, because I do think defining affordability, there's so many ways to define it. It's like there's a lot of options, so some research on that would be good. One other thing I'd just like to flag is it looks like condos are treated specially in the ordinance, right? Condos have to be larger to qualify, but I do think just trying to address condos when we're looking at affordability will be a particular challenge, so I would just want to flag that as a special thing for us to spend some time on too.
Kara, can we get maybe an accounting of the benefits that will accrue to the buildings that are designated as equity priority?
Originally, the intent was to direct federal funding to those buildings. Staff certainly still has the intention to direct funding to those buildings, but absent that certainty of the Department of Energy funding, it's a lower dollar amount. It's also a consideration that could be made for alternative compliance. Is if a building is an equity prioritized building, then perhaps their standards are adjusted. So both focusing incentives towards those buildings and then also adjusting the stake.
Okay.
But again, that's up to this group to determine how they want to approach that.
So
And just one more question. I think the ordinance says that 90% of the penalty funds will be directed toward sort of helping equity buildings, or is that the case?
Just give me a second to find exactly what it says. Or we can have a race with whoever else is looking.
I know, I read it. Yeah, we'll know this like the back of our hands. Oh, let's see.
Yes, at least 90% of fines collected under this ordinance shall be earmarked to a decarbonization fund established to provide financial assistance to covered properties that qualify on a need basis.
So it doesn't say equity prioritized buildings, it says buildings on a need basis. That may or not be the same list, depending on how we,
Right.
okay.
That's an important distinction.
I am wondering, in addition to financial assistance, are we also thinking, or I would like us to think about, like, what other kinds of assistance might be needed, especially given DOE funds and all of those are up in the air, because based on conversations that I've had, like often for these equity prioritized type buildings, like just accessing all that technical information or navigating what technologies are available, what's suitable is like a big thing. And, so maybe that's another, of course, it still requires funds to provide that type of assistance, but just something that I think we should also think about. That could be a big help.
There's an entity called CPACE. Am I getting that right? iPace, CPACE, where it does loans via property taxes. Has the city of Evanston ever had a presentation by them? Or I know in Lake County, they did a huge rollout a couple years ago. But you make an improvement and the city agrees to, or the assessor agrees to finance that improvement and you pay it back with, it's embedded in your property, added to your property tax bill. So that's one way of financing it. However, as I'm speaking out loud, nonprofits and religious organizations don't pay property taxes, so maybe there's another way, but that's a group we should look at.
Maybe going back to our task list, one of the tasks could be identify, and I think not just the county, but the state is supposedly, identifying some green bank opportunities, financing, things like that. And that could apply to both. I mean, if it's financing, it could apply to equity prioritized buildings as well as any building that could qualify for financing, because this could be expensive, whether you're an equity prioritized building or not. So maybe that's a task that we do, is some research there.
Yeah, I was going to say as well, I think tying some of these things together, like not just what other cities have done, but we should look at the way some of these building types are defined by, like the city's programs, utility programs, other financing programs. So, building owners don't have to sort of like meet different marks to qualify for, similar things. I think we want to sort of reduce the burden on these buildings. So the more we can align with local programs, the better.
Maybe related to tasks, but certainly related to our equity priority buildings, is what funds are available this year, or what funds will be available next year. If there are funds available this year, I'd just like to know like a little bit more on the context of those funds. Will they roll over? Do we need to spend them this year? There are buildings that need help now, so let's make sure that we're on the right timeline for moving funds.
Great. And I can fill in some of those gaps. So we have 2 existing programs right now that are broadly for decarbonization purposes. One is Sustain Evanston, which has historically been used for our business community. and one is the Evanston Green Homes pilot, which is mostly smaller scale residential projects. The proposed plan in the fiscal year 2026 budget for the city of Evanston is to use that funding primarily for buildings subject to the Healthy Buildings Ordinance. So retain the structure of those programs, but change who's eligible for them so that it's just buildings that are subject to HBO. And the dollar amount is $300,000 for Sustain Evanston and $250,000 for the Evanston Green Homes program.
Is it per building or is that the total? That's in total. All right, thank you.
But I think that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Well, I'm just on the $550,000, I think the intent in this first year in 2026, given the timeline of this whole thing, I don't think anybody's expected to be necessarily using that for actual retrofits. A lot of it's going to be planning support, verification of benchmarking and things like that. So that's more, get some consultants in and help with your planning if you don't have the wherewithal to do it yourself, which is less than replacing your furnace.
Sure.
So part of the ordinance says that this board is allowed to weigh in on kind of like synergistic policies and programs. Could this staff provide like an update to us at the next meeting on how can we as the board best interact with those programs? Is it helping to define criteria within the program, or is it just through the definition of equity priority buildings that we have influence? That would be helpful.
I think that's definitely something we should talk about at a future meeting. Right now, we're not talking about it too much just because it's in the draft. It's in a proposed budget. But once the budget is approved, then I would really like to hear feedback from this group on how we might run those programs in a way that's beneficial to folks.
A question about defining equity prioritized buildings again. The language around that says a number of things may include public institutions, religious, nonprofit organizations. And for a nonprofit, just a specific question there, we have obviously a large university, which is technically a nonprofit. Is the intent of the ordinance that they would be considered to have equity prioritized buildings, or is that for us to decide how that works?
That's for this board to decide.
Okay, so the legislation wasn't meant to include them when it said nonprofit organizations, like explicitly and intentionally. It was up to us.
Correct.
Okay.
Another question around resources. So I'm wondering if, entities like ComEd, NICOR, have they been a part of this conversation? Or because they have quite a few programs too. And so just wondering if you've engaged with them and how and what might be opportunities to do so going forward.
Yes, staff works closely with both entities, and they were a part of the process when the ordinance was being proposed as well. The technical committee did ask for a presentation from ComEd sometime in the future to talk a little bit more about both the availability of programs, but more so about what sort of technical capacity they might provide and to speak about grid reliability and things like that. So we can ask for something similar from ComEd and NICOR for this group as well.
I think alignment and congruency with existing policies and programs is very important, one of which is the reparations ordinance, which is a response to a long and disturbing history of redlining in the city of Evanston. And so I would hope that the priority buildings reflect the racial components. So if you have buildings that are owned by African Americans or other minorities, we probably need to discuss how we would prioritize them. But I hope that this body does we consider it.
And that goes to part of my question around like how will we define affordable and things like that, because there is market restricted, which is more direct, but there are so many other nuances, like just kind of what you mentioned, like resources behind who owns the building and how we might be supporting those type of minority owners or not, and other criteria I think is pretty important for us to think about.
I want to be clear that even if a building is owned by a black owner, affordability would not necessarily be an issue in that case. That on its face, just like with reparations ordinance, black homeowners have access to special resources because of redress for past harm. So it's not necessarily the case that we would want all black building owners to be affordable housing providers, but if they are in fact Evanston residents, then they should enjoy some sort of special benefits just by being black Evanston building owners who may own buildings that are over 20,000 square feet.
And I just want to make sure I wrote this down right. We're talking about, for the metrics, for determining the equity prioritized buildings, both racial equity in ownership, but also the residents who live there, like the tenants as well, right? Okay.
Ownership and tenancy.
Okay. Is there anything that staff could bring to the next meeting on the equity prioritized buildings topic that would be helpful? I know Jessica mentioned some lists that we developed earlier on, so we can work on dusting those off.
Sorry. We did a very high level analysis of like affordable housing properties as part of the policy adoption process. I think the council had asked for number, like how many affordable properties are in the group of 500, and we did a little bit of like high level analysis there, but not in more depth, and it didn't include these other building types or sort of racial equity metrics, but it's a place to start, I think.
Would staff have time to also look at some of the other BPS programs and see how equity prioritized buildings are defined there?
Yes, we can do that as well.
I'd also be happy to help with that if.
Great. All right. So again, we'll continue to talk about this quite a bit over the next few weeks. But for now, let's move into a topic that staff has been focused on lately, and that is on the topic of benchmarking noncompliance. So as I mentioned, we've had a benchmarking ordinance since 2016. Our compliance rate for 2024 data is just around 65%. Considering that this board is responsible for rulemaking for an ordinance for performance standards for buildings, if we don't have data from the buildings that are covered, we won't be able to hold them to a performance standard. So we've been, I personally have been concerned about this the entire time that I've worked for the city of Evanston, that we need our compliance rate to be higher so that we can enforce this ordinance. So we wanted to ask this board, since it's an accountability board, an equity focused board, how we as staff can approach compliance and prioritize compliance so that we can improve those numbers. We do have fines in place for not reporting the data. So that is a tool at our disposal, but we've not ever used that tool because it does require a heavy lift from staff. So we wanted to pitch this question to you all, understanding that we very quickly need these buildings to report so that we can meet our timeline of getting interim performance standards for 2030.
Is there any kind of a pattern at all, Kara, to the type of buildings that are not compliant? Like if we look at the 35% that are not reporting, do they happen to be a certain type of use, certain size, certain location within the city? Or is it all over the place, really?
I'd like to jump in. So I used to do this. It was, making sure these buildings submitted their data. It's typically the buildings that you would think. It's buildings that, are under-resourced. They're low on staff capacity. They're maybe low on technical expertise, on understanding. And they're buildings that are hard for the city to reach. So you're not on any newsletters, if maybe you don't have any property management on site, and the city is sending letters to your building, the letters end up who knows where. And ultimately, I mean, this is a team of two with 100 other responsibilities if you look at their climate action and resilience plan. So they need adequate staff capacity. So the more, even if they add one more person, it's not going to be enough. I would like to also say I'm happy to volunteer and help these buildings if there's not staff capacity for them to get benchmarking done. Please feel free to send them to my personal email. But what do we do with the fines? I mean, the ordinance does require them to show up to the city of Evanston, and at that point they're in front of a judge, and is there opportunity for them to make an argument that we've received this fine, but we find that it's unfair because of our capacity to do this work. And then there's an opportunity, right? Once they're aware of it, send them my way, give them the steps. We have resources. We have a step-by-step guidance on how to get the work done. It's not that hard, but if maybe you don't have access to a computer, or your computer's really slow, I think there's a way to get the data without fining people. So I think that should be the goal, is get the data, don't fine people.
I would agree. I think non-punitive, at least a mindset like that is what I would love for us to have, to not assume that people are just not complying, because they don't care. There could be real challenges behind those, and if we can try to uncover that, that would be good.
Do you want to go first, Tom?
Yeah, just a precursor question. And maybe I missed that. Did we identify these buildings that are non-compliant? Is there a list?
Yes, we have a list.
And what Ben was saying is the communication might be somewhat that they don't have the ability to maybe access, or they're not even maybe receiving it to realize they're non-compliant, right? And that seems to be a lot of the times is the communication of it. So, and then they don't probably understand, like I see it as from an operator, and some of you on the panel are mechanical engineers as well. And so ultimately what we're trying to do is drive carbon emissions lower, right? At a certain time frame, where do we start finding them? When is that? I'm just out of curiosity. I don't when do they have, I'm representing BOMA, so I'm wondering, they're also going to be instilling measures as well for energy efficiency and how, and some of the owners might have the, equity to make those means, but some of the people on these apartments and condo units might not have it. So I was just kind of wondering, what is the timeline for them to, when they get these notices in the mail? I mean, I think, Ben, you were probably on the initial write-up of the ordinance, right? You were mentioning. So I just, out of the timeline, I just didn't know what that was.
So I guess to provide a little bit more context, benchmarking reporting is due June 30th of the following year. So this last June, you should have submitted your 2024 data. Not sure how that has been handled in 2025. But but there should be continuous communication throughout the year. Once a building is aware, now you hopefully have their attention, they understand the process of getting it done, but we often see a common issue is short-term ownership. And so I think part of what we can do in terms of engagement is coming up with a strategy for when property ownership transfers. But the timeline as far as when do communications go out and fines and warnings. So also like some background on like the fine process is you have to receive a warning first, and that warning says something like, yeah, there's a number of days you have to become compliant, but yeah. So the way that I used to run it was most buildings who received a warning would communicate like, what is this? How do I do this? So.
Well, that's it. There's just a lack of understanding. And what is the data or metrics of how many buildings are reporting this? Is it under 50%? 60?
65.
65, okay. Yep. Okay, thank you.
So, what's the absolute number there? Like how many buildings that would be covered by this are not reporting?
It's a math test, Bob.
It's a math test. I don't
It's
know
like
the universe.
150-ish.
150 buildings?
Yeah. So who are not compliant. And so the question that staff is really posing to this group is, we have historically never been able to really get this number that significantly higher than this. And so I think we need a smaller bite out of that 150 buildings to focus on for non-compliance. Which buildings should we focus on first? Because we've tried to do them all at once, all of the non-compliant buildings, and then we just can't handle that volume of communications as two people. So we need a smaller bite or like a prioritization of who's not following the rules.
Could we, for the next meeting, and I think we've already asked for that, get that sifted down? So, size of building, classification as nonprofit, religious, corporate, educational, whatever. And then you identify ownership and management. And where I'm going with this is like, Tom said, primarily it's people don't know what they don't know. So laws get passed all the time and people are not aware of them. Property owners, big and small, don't know. You might be an out-of-state entity, or you've hired a property manager that isn't passing along local information to you about what's going on. So and sending out letters, right, most often, if for the buildings that are not complying, are probably just going, to a bin somewhere. Or you might have an owner that's saying, no way, no how am I going to work on this because, they've got X, Y, and Z reasons. So I think, like you mentioned, Kara, is taking a good subset and doing some outreach. And sometimes, maybe that's physically, if we had 30 buildings, let's say, and really driving by those buildings and saying, hey, oh, that's a property management company. Really, talking to them on the phone and saying, are you aware? Oh, no, I'm not aware what's involved. And then doing some hand-holding. And I think you could drive that number up. And you're like, oh, great, Stephanie, that sounds like a lot of time I don't have, due to our staffing. But we can talk about that. But I would think that would be the best approach, is really, sifting through these and then by type and maybe by size and reaching out and talking to the ownership and doing hand-holding. Because, this is, sometimes people blame, I'm a landlord and people think landlords should know everything. Right, you own the building, you run the building, but, is benchmarking, part of your strategy? It probably wasn't. going in. So help me out because I want to be a partner in the community.
Yeah, no, I would just add, kind of reinforce, I do think having that priority list would help. And there may be some landlords or building owners who have multiple properties that are among the 150, and maybe one phone call can get you to somebody who owns 8 buildings, and then you start to make a dent pretty quickly. So that was just a thought. And a question, too, is just the level of effort it takes to do benchmarking for your average, let's say, 20,000 square foot building. My impression is that's not that hard, and Ben, I think you were even offering to help people with it. Do you have a sense of the number of hours it takes, or if you're going to hire someone, what's the cost of benchmarking a building of the size that we expect to see? Just like a rough.
Well, I'll let Jessica comment on cost. It can be done for free. So at least this ordinance now no longer has a verification requirement for this year, for this program year, I think. Benchmarking can be done for free. There are tools that make it easier. So I would say, as a rule of thumb, for someone who has access to a computer and internet, the first time you benchmark is the hardest because you're going to need to collect building details, like when was it built, what's the square footage breakdown on if you have multiple use types. There are easier and harder ways to do this. You could go through your bills. I would say that's the hardest way, most time consuming. Rule of thumb, I would say budget 3 hours for your first time benchmarking, and then annually an hour or 2.
Yep. Yeah, that's my understanding too. I just wanted to confirm this is not a super onerous task, actually.
It really depends too on the building complexity. Like buildings that have complex metering setups can be much more difficult. Like the Carlson building is a building that I supported benchmarking on, and because it's like a hodgepodge of, different buildings and systems, that type of building can, be a little bit more complex and maybe require someone with a little bit more expertise. Some of the buildings at Northwestern also, because of the way they connect to the plant that's on site, like those types of buildings are somewhat difficult. And then there's kind of the piece of tenant data, and like being able to, get data from the utility that's, anonymized, which usually is straightforward, but sometimes people have some issues with that. And I would just say I'm a little bit out of date here, but I used to work at Elevate, and one of the programs that I worked on was supporting like a benchmarking consulting service for affordable housing. And I think, at a nonprofit rate, and this was 6+ years ago, we charged in the like $2,000 range to support an owner to like collect all that data and put it in the system. So a bigger building might cost more.
I just want to, so point of clarification, I said 3 hours. This is maybe like 3 hours of you sitting at the computer. You could wait a month for NICOR to get back to you. The easiest way to benchmark is to, like Jessica said, get the aggregate. So there's processes to do that, but you run into bottlenecks of NICOR's ability and speed to respond to you. The ComEd energy usage data system is fairly quick. Maybe there's a week timeline to get set up in that system.
I was wondering that the notices that go out to property owners telling them to do this, is there a way, or maybe it already happens, can we include resources, some of these things that are being mentioned, like whether there is some kind of an online training too that people can access, that this is all that you're required to do, or like here are some local resources, whether it is Elevate or others that like offer this, because I think just even generally speaking, like when you're required to do something that you don't know anything about, but if like somebody also gives you some potential resources, you just make it easier for that person to take the next step. So perhaps, just access to some resources, like right there along with the letter. That'd be good.
We do send that out. We have webinars, and then there's a team at the Illinois Green Alliance that helps. So anyone that responds to us, we always connect them with resources that are free to help. The issue that we've been having for years is that there's a huge rate of people who ignore all communication, or the letter doesn't even reach them and it gets returned to us. And so I think I've heard some feedback about how we might prioritize with owners of multiple buildings. The largest buildings is an option. Any other sort of prioritization that staff should consider for trying to improve this compliance rate?
As a building owner who's tried to figure out my building owner next door is, talk to the assessor and maybe have the assessor, just do a quick, hey, this is our list. Can you guys update this list as to contacts? And I don't know if your building department has any kind of registration that's required, or, some cities have done that. So that's just an idea. And like I said, sometimes it's just going to take physically going over there and seeing and calling the number on the for rent sign. Once again, you'll hear me constantly talking about the apartments, but so that's one way. Sometimes you just have to go out of the office.
Quick question too. I mean, these multi-family establishments, are they being inspected by the Evanston City Fire Department on an annual basis?
I'm not sure about annual, but there are inspections that happen.
Okay, so I would assume maybe this becomes some sort of annual, energy type of investigation or some type of inspection of some sort, right? And I agree, maybe you tie it to the assessor's office, or have we talked about Constellation? Is there programs out there maybe that they would reach out to it? Because I know when I've worked in commercial properties, there was like load curtailment programs, like demand response, where we would do load shedding. So you would think this would be a benefit to building owners as well, where we would have the ability. What we're trying to do is drive energy costs down, but also, be equitable. So I just didn't know whether or not if anyone had any shared ideas on that, but I would assume maybe some sort of annual type of, inspection of some sort where we're trying to drive this ordinance.
I'd certainly hope that we draw on existing resources to do this. I'm sure the city has considered volunteer trained inspectors. Given the work that I do, I can tell you that there'll be a line of people willing to do that work. I have a question. Of the 150 buildings that are non-compliant, how many have never done it? And how many have done it before? I mean, you may or may not have that information now, but I think it's important to know, given that the startup costs that I think Ben and Jessica are helping us understand. If someone has never done it before, then they should probably have some special attention from the city or from some sort of a volunteer resource. But I'd also would like to bring up that, so this ordinance has a horizon to 2050. And along the way, there are 5 sort of metric milestones, right? 2030, 2035, 2040, 2045. I think that's what I read. So at some point, perhaps there needs to be some sort of nuclear option on the table or escalating penalty scale, where I don't know if the city is able to levy liens or what you can do to put the fear of God in some of these owners. But at some point, if at 2040, 2045, you have a building owner who's never benchmarked, perhaps something should happen, something significant. The other question that I have is, is there a difference between a building that's 100,000 square feet when they are non-compliant versus a building, obviously the potential impact for being non-compliant and for your CO2 emissions of a huge building like that would be much more significant than one that's smaller. So perhaps of that 150 buildings, there needs to be priority on the ones that can do the most damage.
Yep, that's all. This is all very helpful. Any other last comments on benchmarking non-compliance?
The one other thing I would suggest is I know we haven't come up with a definitive definition of equity prioritized buildings yet, but if there are buildings on the non-compliant list that stand out to city staff as being obvious candidates for some financial support in 2026 from, the Sustain Evanston and Green Buildings, because those funds will be allocated until they run out. I would say, if there's 5 or 6 or 10 buildings on that list that would be obvious candidates for some of that funding to help them make a plan, I would say go back to them, because they're going to have benchmarking data in place before they can even start to make a plan. So just to make sure that the money we have for 2026 is spent where it can do the most good.
Yeah, I was going to say it would be helpful to see a map, and if there are clusters of non-compliant buildings that are in lower income neighborhoods or wards, to the comment of aligning with, other policies, if we want to say, we want you to prioritize your limited time doing that, door-to-door outreach in the 5th Ward, I think that would, it would be helpful to sort of like see a map.
Great. This is very helpful. So at our next, yes.
Just for my edification and everyone, has there been any feedback on the tool that is used by a person that has to submit the data? Has, everyone said, oh yeah, this is just easy to put everything in, or, my computer freezes when I'm using this to input stuff, is everything copacetic on that end so that we're making it as easy as possible?
So we switched in 2025 to Clearly Energy's Beam tool, and I have not heard any complaints about it to my knowledge. And there was a lot of training about how to get into that system as well. It's, from my perspective, made things easier both for staff and for the folks who report.
And is that is that something that we could see, just for our own edification, what the owner or who's inputting that, what that form looks like? Is that public on the city?
Yep, everything is on our website.
Okay,
Yeah.
even that, okay.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Just super quick comment on that. They're using the best option available.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for that. At our next meeting, staff will come with some lists of some options for where we might prioritize. So we won't be focusing on any communication about noncompliance until we have that third staff member, and then they would need to be onboarded. But that is a priority for them because, as Baxter mentioned, if we get to a point where we're talking about compliance for building performance standards, it doesn't make sense to give a building a pass because the city has not enforced the benchmarking ordinance. So that's why it's of particular concern to staff that we get this compliance rate up. All right, we have 2 more items to discuss. First, our next meeting agenda, which we're going to develop collaboratively in this meeting since we don't have our chairs and co-chairs yet. So we heard some things. First, to go through the ordinance language and start to talk about any questions that come up. And then related to equity prioritized buildings, we talked about staff looking into what other communities do and looking at some of the lists from several months ago that we had developed. We'll come back on the noncompliance issue with some more information. And we do have a fellow who's working on this now, and I think we have a list of a handful of entities that have never reported, or they've reported, but they've always been out of compliance. Anything else that stands out for the next meeting agenda that we want to talk about? Or any homework we want to assign ourselves of things we should look at. The technical committee has been sending a whole lot of resources that are on the board and committee's website. So there's a lot of resources from partner entities like IMT. We got some of them access to ASHRAE's BPS guide. So if you have resources relevant to this work, please send them to staff and we'll keep adding them to the website. Anything else for the agenda for next time?
Not saying we should do this, but we didn't talk a lot about alternative compliance plans, and that is a huge impact on the equity implications of this ordinance. It's not just equity priority buildings. And so I'm not sure when we should talk about it, but it's an important topic and it could go as far as an exemption. So just keep that in mind for another tool at our disposal.
Great. And if anyone thinks of anything before our next meeting, just send it to staff and we can add it to the agenda. Now our last item for business is to vote on our meeting schedule. And so we had tentatively, based on some of those polls before, settled on the first Friday of the month at this time in this place. But if that does not work for people, we can have a discussion now. For now, I did put up those first Friday dates through the end of 2026 and flagged a few that seemed potentially problematic, and we might want to talk about moving some of those around. But let's start first, December 5th, same time and place. Does that work for people? Okay. Now let's talk about 2026 schedule. Are there any concerns generally with first Friday, same time and same place? Okay. Does January 9th work then for the first one? Okay. And then what about this July 3rd situation?
That's going to be a holiday officially. Yeah, so yeah, I'd move that too.
Okay. Is it 10th? Right. July 10th. And then what about September 4th? And that was the Friday before Labor Day? Or Labor Day weekend, I think. I think that was the issue with that one.
Yeah, it is Labor Day weekend. It's a Friday before Labor Day weekend. September 7th.
Do people think we should move that one too?
Yes.
Okay. September 11th then. Great. Any discussion on this meeting schedule? People, we can also change it into the future, but it's nice to have something done. All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve the meeting schedule. I'll second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Great. Any other questions or comments? All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. Did you catch that, Kirsten? Dean, motion. Baxter, is it Swilly? I never, Swilly, second. All those in favor? Aye. All right, we stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody.